the AWS Worldwide Public Sector Summit in DC. So, for this segment, we are going to be talking with Eric Weber from AWS. And can you tell us a little bit about what you're going to be telling customers about today, Eric?
Sure. So thanks for having me. I wanted to talk to customers about how we can handle patching both on AWS as well as patching hybrid management resources as well.
Gotcha. Okay, so I'm going to have to reveal myself as a complete noob. So I have a background in quantum physics, and I don't know a lot of AWS stuff. So can you tell me actually just really basic definition, what is patching in this context?
Sure. So probably, just to relate it most easily would be, think of like Windows updates when, you have your Windows desktop or Windows laptop, you
Sure.
have to perform
Yeah.
updates against it. So you're performing some patching. So the
Gotcha.
same is going to be true for our EC2 instances, whether they are Windows or Linux operating systems, as well as, when we go into the server space a little bit further, this can also extend to resources in on-prem data centers or even VMs and other cloud providers as well.
Sure. Gotcha. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. So why would customers be interested in this particular application on AWS?
Sure. So, patching is critical for everyone when you're running, these servers and VMs. It helps maintain your security state. You need to perform updates in order to remain compliant, both with regulations as well as just being aware of any vulnerabilities that may exist within your environment. So, patching is critical both for security as well as regulation impact, I guess.
For sure. So what are the main challenges that customers tend to run into when trying to deploy their own patching strategies?
Yeah, so patching, it isn't always as simple as just go ahead and push it out. It's ready to go. We need to think about where these different environments reside when we're talking about within AWS, whether they're across different accounts, different regions, different development environments, whether you're patching your dev resources, QA, prod. Like I was mentioning before, if those resources also extend to an on-prem data center or even they're hosted in other cloud providers, there's all of these disparate resources that we need to, well, one, perform patch scans in the first place, just so we can identify what some of those vulnerabilities are and be aware of that current state, as well as then when we start thinking about actually performing a patch install, there's several different pieces to it, both along the lines of, making sure that we patch our development workloads before we push to production, as well as there's application considerations as well. Do we need to patch specific groups of our application workload before we can go ahead and proceed with the others? So there's a lot of different moving pieces that can go into place when we're talking about patching, especially when we start talking about all of these hybrid environments.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can imagine that if you have to combine both constantly scanning all of your different systems for the need to patch them, as well as actually deploying it across all of these potentially very disparate, as you said, resources, that can be quite a challenge to manage by yourself. So what are some of the ways that customers can help address that?
Yeah, so what we'll be focusing on today is going to be the service AWS Systems Manager. So AWS Systems Manager, a portion of it that's focused on the remote management side is built on top of the Systems Manager agent or SSM agent. And that is the functionality or service that customers can use to adopt that single tool set across all of these different locations. So because it is an agent-based product, you can install it in those on-prem environments, AWS, or even in other cloud, and use a single tool to have in place this patch scan or patch install operations, as well as by installing the Systems Manager agent, you then have access to a wide variety of other node management features within Systems Manager, like session management, just generic remote management, inventory data gathering. So there's a lot of other features that we won't necessarily focus on today. We'll be focusing more on the patching side, but it does extend beyond just what we're talking about.
Interesting. So you mentioned patching for compliance. So is there a straightforward way to kind of track how your compliance patching has been deployed, or like where you are out of compliance?
Yeah, so when we flip over more into the demo side, what we actually will be taking a look at is an example QuickSight dashboard that helps visualize your overall patching state. How many of your resources are compliant, breaking that up across your accounts by regions, getting some very detailed information, like what are the specific updates that are marked as missing in the first place. Probably to bring it to a real world example, a little over a year ago now, we had the Log4j event that was occurring where customers needed to deploy out a patch quickly and be able to identify which of those resources had that missing update in the first place. So using these tools that we'll take a look at today, customers can easily identify both that patching state of those that are marked as missing, as well as then, if needed, go ahead and proceed with that installation route as well.
Gotcha. And now I know this is an odd time to ask this question, but can you tell me what is your title and what team do you work on?
Sure. So I'm a senior specialist solutions architect for our cloud operations services. So I primarily help customers when they're interested in AWS Systems Manager, Config, CloudTrail, and Audit Manager.
Gotcha. Well, perfect person for this demo then. Let's see it.
Awesome. So here I am within the AWS Systems Manager console. So what we're going to take a look at first is what we call patch policies, which is located within the quick setup section of the Systems Manager console. So quick setup, as the name suggests, is a way to get started quickly, both with AWS Systems Manager as well as a variety of other AWS services, including things like Config, as well as DevOps Guru. For today, we'll focus on the Patch Manager one. So this is effectively what we call patch policies, and this is something that we released earlier this year, back in January. So what patch policies do, as well as quick setup overall, is it helps you, it defines a few different parameters depending on that configuration type, and then it allows you to push it out across your AWS organization. So across those accounts, across those regions as needed. So when we're working with these patch policies, we can also be very filtered both on that account region level, as well as which managed instances we actually end up targeting. So if we do need to filter based off of specific applications, that may need to be patched at a particular time, or even have differing patch criteria, we can deploy out multiple iterations of these policies, which we'll take a look at in just a moment. Let's say that I am creating a patch policy for my QA environment. So when I'm building out this patch policy, there's a few different parameters available. The first, of course, is just built in. We need to perform at minimum a patch scan, but we can always include that we want to specify a patch installation schedule as well. And for both of these, we can either go with the generic defaults of performing a patch scan at 1 a.m. UTC, or for the install side, maybe I want to provide a differing schedule than 2 a.m. on Sundays. So in here, I can fill out my cron expression, specify if I need to perform it on the first Saturday of the month, second Saturday, all of those different types of values that may be needed, when you are defining both when patch scans should take place or when patch installs should take place. For now, I'll just flip it back to the default. And then as well as for the install side, you can optionally choose if you want to include a reboot. Now, of course, rebooting nodes, can impact service availability, so we do warn you of that. But if you want to go ahead and perform a reboot following patch installation, you can optionally choose to opt in for that. Now, the next portion is really one of the biggest benefits of using these patch policies, and that is for providing a central definition of what types of updates we want to scan or approve for installation, when those operations take place. Now, you can either go with the recommended defaults provided by AWS. These are typically critical and important related updates that have been released for at least 7 days. But alternatively, if we also want to include some custom criteria, we can provide those custom baselines that you create as well. So in here, I'll just create or I'll select 2 of my custom baselines because in my environment, I'm running Amazon Linux 2 as well as Windows instances. And if we take a look at those baselines real quick, let me just flip over to this tab. So in here, my criteria that I'm defining is that I'm going to install security updates and bug fix updates of any sort, and then as well as non-security related updates. So by using these patch policies, I can enforce that same criteria is being used across all of my accounts, across all my regions, or those that I end up selecting later on, as well as those targeted resources as well.
Interesting. So it looks like you said that these ones are like default policies, essentially, that we're going to scan for. So can users also create their own custom ones for, say, on-prem resources or things like that?
Yeah, so in this targeting section, that's where we see what AWS accounts, what regions we want to target with this patch policy. So if I were to expand this out, I can see my AWS OU broken up here. So in here, I could select that QA organization unit. Underneath that OU, I have all of my QA related accounts. And then I can define, where those resources reside. So when we're talking about EC2, of course, they'll reside in the respective region where you launch it. But when we're talking about those hybrid resources, again, whether they're on-prem or in other cloud, basically as part of the registration process, we register them with a specific account, and then we specify the particular region as well. And we can tag those resources just the same as EC2 instances. So down here in the targeting section, this is where we can then fill out those instance tag details. So in my environment, I have a simple tag key value pair of patch true or false. So for any resources that are matching this tag key value, they'll be included within those patch scans or those patch install operations. So this is kind of where we can segment out what workloads we want to include within a given schedule operation. And then beyond that, when we are talking about performing the patch install, we can also, well, this applies to both the scan and install, but it's a little bit more important for the install, in my opinion, which is going to be around some of these rate controls. So defining how many of those nodes should concurrently perform a patch scan or a patch install at a single time, as well as defining an error threshold of how many errors we're willing to accept. Now, both of these values can either be a percentage or just a flat number. So let's say in a sample scenario, we may have 100 managed nodes that are performing a patch install at a single time. We may specify that we only want to keep it concurrently at 10%. So 10 of those nodes will go ahead and perform a patch install. And if we flip this over to 0 instead, and we say we're not willing to accept, well, as soon as the first error occurs, what would then happen is that the remaining 90 instances that have not started yet, they would no longer have the patch installation kicked to them. So it's a way to hopefully mitigate any potential issues should they come up. So definitely recommend taking a look at these concurrency and error thresholds and mapping them accordingly with both the environment as well as the workload that we're working or applying this to.
Yeah, makes sense. I'm imagining that's mostly for like service availability, making sure that you're not trying to do a patch install on every single one of your
exactly
nodes at the same time.
There is an option to say go ahead and apply to all managed nodes, but we most likely want to go with a more targeted approach using that tagging.
Makes sense.
And then there are some IAM permissions as well. Quick setup can help remediate some of those IAM permissions. This will help both onboard the EC2 instance and register it with Systems Android in the first place, as well as attach some S3 permissions that are required for this overall process. So we can actually choose to enable this as well, which will augment it slightly. But if I were to hit create here, what's going to occur is that underneath the hood, we're going to launch a CloudFormation stack set that ends up provisioning out these resources in those targeted accounts and regions. Just for the sake of the demonstration, I'm just going to open up one that I created earlier. So in here, this is that same QA deployment that I pushed out earlier today. I can see the accounts that I'm targeting as well as the regions. In my case, my environment is fairly small. It's only a single account within that OU, but we would see the other accounts listed out, should you have more underneath that overall umbrella. And like I was mentioning, let me flip over again. So I'm over in the CloudFormation console, over in the stack sets location, and then I pulled up one of those underlying stack sets. So the quick setup process, like I mentioned, it's going to leverage stack sets underneath the hood in order to stand up all of these different resources to put in place that patch scan or those patch installation jobs. So here, again, we can see there's different accounts and regions, and we can actually see the CloudFormation template that was used as well. So one thing that I just wanted to bring up quickly is, the account and region that I'm currently logged in. This is the organization root account. And some customers that we've spoken with since since this feature has been released is that they're interested in deploying this out across their accounts and regions from a delegated administration account instead. So we do have a workshop that talks about how you can go ahead and deploy these, through a delegated admin account and deploy it out directly through CloudFormation. So that's something that I also just wanted to briefly mention, that customers can always choose to opt into, should they want to deploy from a delegated admin account or integrate, these patch policies into their existing infrastructure as code rather than going through the quick setup console directly.
Gotcha. Super cool. Can we jump back to the dashboard actually?
Yeah.
So I was curious, the middle one, I wasn't quite sure what configuration association status means.
Sure. So when these or when patch policies are deployed out, within each of those accounts and regions, they're using some underlying contracts within AWS Systems Manager, which are called state manager associations. Now, of course, what happens to be the case here is that one of my associations ended up failing for the demo, but that's okay. The remaining ones are all successful, which are the more important ones for scanning for patches, or in this case, waiting until we actually go ahead and install. But in here, these estate associations really just mean we're associating an action with those sets of resources. So in this case, we're creating that association that we want to perform the action, perform a patch scan. In this case, the schedule is once every day at 1 UTC. And in this case, the install job is going to be waiting until the second Saturday of the month before we actually go ahead and proceed with installing updates.
Cool. Well, I imagine customers will be pretty excited to learn that they can do all of this stuff in one AWS service. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
And then thoughts?
Yeah. So, once we have this patch policy deployed out, and once we start performing some of those patch scans, then we can also go into the reporting side of things. So just to show a brief diagram or an architecture diagram of what I'll be demonstrating in just a moment. If we're looking to aggregate, patch compliance data and get some of that information that I was mentioning earlier, as well as visualize it, we can use a couple different resources. Probably the main one to highlight is these AWS Systems Manager resource data sinks. So what it does is it takes the information from that account and region. It takes patch compliance data, state manager association data, and inventory data, and it dumps it into an S3 bucket that we specify as a JSON blob. So once we have that information in the JSON, or in that S3 bucket as a JSON file, we can then use services like Athena and or QuickSight to be able to query and visualize it. So this is really where we start getting into that reporting side and visualizing all of this information across our accounts and regions. So let me go ahead and flip into my analytics account for the all intents and purposes. And over here, I'm now in the Athena console, where we can go ahead and perform some of those SQL-based queries against that S3 bucket. So if I wanted to quickly pull some information about which of my resources are non-compliant for patch, and again, including that same tag key value pair that I'm targeting, I can query this information. It's going to reflect that back for me, so I can quickly see, in this case, across this particular account, across 2 different regions, there are some instances that are missing updates. I can see details about those updates as well. So this information, we can always download it as a CSV file, and share it out. But customers, of course, some are very familiar with writing SQL queries. Some people are also just visual learners and want to see that pretty dashboard as well.
I love a pretty dashboard.
So by having these Athena databases and tables created, we can always then integrate that with QuickSight as well and bring up our dashboards. So I'll flip over into just an example, patch compliance dashboard that I created, using that same information. So from here, really, the dashboard is going to be fully customizable. The information that you're looking for, you would be able to populate within here. In this case, some example widgets are, of course, how many of my managed instances are compliant with patching versus those that are non-compliant. Kind of breaking that out as well based on the account as well as the region. So in this case, I have 16 of my instances are non-compliant for patching. They're split evenly across his accounts. If we were to take a look at some of the other information, how many critical updates are currently marked as missing across my instances. If I wanted to get that same detailed information that we were taking a look at over in Athena, that information is available here as well. Within QuickSight, this is really kind of the part that, if you want to bring in some other information, or if your organization requires different visualization types, we can most likely just bring it in from that single same data set that we were talking about earlier.
Sweet.
And then, of course, within QuickSight, you can then always have this configured to be emailed. So if you do require to see this information daily, weekly, you can generate reports that are sent to the appropriate parties or teams that may be interested in this type of information. And some other filters that I've also added to this are going to be, based on the account ID. If we're looking for a specific resource that we need to filter down, region, what is the patch status, those tag keys, capture time. So really flexible as far as how we want to actually visualize this information.
Super cool. Well, yeah, that was really great. And did you have anything else you wanted customers to know?
So that'll really be it. Again, I just want to probably just highlight one last thing, which would be this workshop, which is going to be focused around that patch compliance reporting. So if you are interested in it, you should be able to just go ahead and find this workshop and then go ahead and get started with it.
Sweet. Well, thanks so much, Eric, and